For 2 decades, Elena believed her marriage was unbreakable. Her husband, Victor, was not just her partner but her confidant and anchor. Together, they had built a life that others admired, a beautiful home, 2 bright children, and what seemed to be an unshakable bond. To the outside world, they were the perfect family, the kind that neighbors admired and friends envied. Elena took pride in this image, in the stability she thought they shared. But cracks had started to form, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Victor began withdrawing 3 years ago, his smiles less genuine, his affection more infrequent. At first, Elena dismissed it as the toll of years spent juggling work, parenting, and life's inevitable routines. She believed in finding solutions, not problems. She filled the gaps with special dinners, surprise outings, and gestures meant to remind Victor of the love they'd once shared. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't reach him. Then came the business trips. They started infrequently, only once or twice a year. But in the last 6 months, they became alarmingly frequent. Each time, Victor's tone grew more distant, his answers more vague. He would talk about deadlines, clients, and conferences, brushing off her questions as if they were interruptions. Elena's stomach twisted into knots as doubts crept in. She couldn't shake the feeling that her husband was hiding something. One sleepless night, as Victor snored softly beside her, Elena lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the clues in her mind. The business trips, the detached glances, his phone always face down on the table. Was she imagining things? Could it really be happening to her? The woman who had spent 20 years trusting her husband implicitly? But it was the rumors that shattered her fragile denial. A neighbor had casually mentioned seeing Victor's car parked in an unfamiliar part of town, a place with no known clients or offices. Then came the whispers of a younger woman, someone who had been seen with Victor on his so-called business trips. The news hit her like a punch to the stomach. For days, Elena tried to convince herself it was a misunderstanding, but the nagging ache in her chest told her otherwise. And now, as she sat alone in their pristine living room, tears streaming down her face, she faced a decision she never thought she'd have to make: confront Victor or continue the charade of their perfect family. Her thoughts turned to her children: Alex, 18, about to leave for university, and Lily, 15, still navigating the stormy seas of adolescence. Would she ruin their image of their father? Would exposing the truth fracture the stability they'd always known? But the alternative, staying silent and pretending, felt unbearable. Elena wiped her tears and took a deep breath. She needed answers. She deserved answers. That evening, Elena waited for Victor to return home. Dinner was set on the table, the usual warmth of their family meals replaced by an icy tension that only she seemed to feel. The kids chatted about their day, oblivious to the storm brewing in their mother's heart. When the dishes were cleared and the children retreated to their rooms, Elena found Victor in his study, scrolling absent-mindedly on his laptop. She stood in the doorway for a moment, her pulse racing, before finally stepping inside. "Victor," she began, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." He looked up, surprised by her tone. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing. Elena hesitated, her mind battling between fear and resolve. Finally, she blurted out, "Is there someone else?" The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Victor blinked, his face unreadable. "What are you talking about?" he said, his voice carefully measured. "I'm not blind, Victor," Elena said, her voice growing steadier. "The business trips, the distance, the rumors. I need to know the truth." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples as if the weight of her question was unbearable. "Elena, you're imagining things," he said. "You've been stressed lately. Maybe you're overthinking. Don't you dare gaslight me." Elena snapped, surprising even herself with the sharpness of her voice. "I've spent 20 years being your partner, your equal. Don't insult my intelligence." Victor's face darkened. He stood up, towering over her, but she didn't flinch. "Fine," he said, his tone cold. "There's someone, but it's not what you think." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She felt the ground beneath her shift. "Not what I think. Then what is it, Victor? A business arrangement? A misunderstanding? Tell me." Victor sighed again, this time with frustration. "She's young, yes. It was the distraction. That's all." It doesn't mean anything. I've never stopped loving you, Elena. His words felt like a cruel joke. A distraction, she repeated, her voice breaking. Do you think that makes it better? Do you think that erases the betrayal? Elena, listen to me, he said, his voice softening. I love our family. I love you. What we have is real. I don't want to lose that. But as she stared into his pleading eyes, Elena realized something. She didn't recognize this man anymore. The Victor she had loved, the one she had trusted with her heart, was gone. In his place was a stranger, someone who had not only betrayed her trust but tried to minimize the damage with shallow excuses. Without another word, she turned and left the room, slamming the door behind her. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Elena struggled to maintain a sense of normalcy for the sake of her children, but inside, she was crumbling. She found herself oscillating between anger and heartbreak, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Why had Victor done this? Was their life together not enough? Had she failed as a wife, a partner? And most importantly, what was she supposed to do now? She confided in her closest friend, Nadia, who listened patiently as Elena poured out her heart. You don't have to make a decision right away, Nadia said gently. Give yourself time to process. But whatever you do, don't let him manipulate you into thinking this is your fault. Elena nodded, but the words offered little comfort. How could she move forward when her entire life felt like a lie? One evening, as she sat alone in the living room, she received a message on her phone. It was from an unknown number. Her heart sank as she read the words. I thought you should know. He's still seeing her. They were together last night. Attached was a photo of Victor and the young woman, their faces close, their smiles intimate. The photo was taken at a restaurant, one Elena didn't recognize. Her hands shook as she stared at the image, her vision blurring with tears. Any lingering hope that Victor had told her the full truth was shattered. Elena confronted Victor again that night, this time armed with the evidence she had been sent. He didn't deny it. Instead, he begged for her forgiveness, insisting that the affair meant nothing and that he was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. But Elena had heard enough. You didn't just betray me, Victor, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. You betrayed our family, our life, and you lied to my face, again and again. Victor fell silent, his shoulders slumping in defeat. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. I want you to leave, Elena replied. At least for now. I need space to figure out what's next. He nodded, his expression pained, and packed a bag that night. In the weeks that followed, Elena began to rebuild her life. She focused on her children, on maintaining a sense of stability for them even as her own world felt like it was falling apart. She started therapy, both for herself and as a family, to help navigate the emotional fallout of Victor's betrayal. Surprisingly, she found strength in the very thing she had feared most, the truth. By confronting the reality of her situation, she was able to take control of her narrative. She stopped worrying about what others would think and started focusing on what she needed to heal. Victor reached out several times, pleading for another chance. But Elena remained firm. I don't know if we can ever fix this, she told him. But for now, I need to focus on myself and the kids. And for the first time in years, Elena felt a sense of freedom, a chance to rediscover who she was beyond the roles of wife and mother. It wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to move forward one step at a time. The days without Victor in the house were strange, almost too quiet. For the first time in 20 years, Elena didn't have to worry about his habits, his presence, or his judgment. At first, it felt liberating. She could sit at the dining table with her cup of tea and let her thoughts wander without the tension of unspoken words hanging between them. But the silence had its price. Late at night, when the kids were asleep, loneliness crept in. She found herself reaching for her phone, scrolling through old photos of their family vacations. Victor laughing on a beach, holding Alex in his arms as a toddler, and Lily chasing seagulls by the shore. Each image brought a pang of sadness. How had they gone from that happy, carefree family to this? Was it her fault? Had she failed to keep things exciting? Was there something wrong with her? But then, like clockwork, the memory of that photo returned. The image of Victor sitting across from another woman, smiling as though he hadn't just shattered his family's foundation. The betrayal would always pierce through her nostalgia like a knife. It was a reminder of why she had made her decision. For the sake of her children, Elena tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. She helped Alex with his university applications and stayed up late making flashcards with Lily for an upcoming history test. But every so often, she would catch her children exchanging worried glances when they thought she wasn't looking. One night, as they sat around the dinner table, Alex finally broke the silence. "Mom, have you talked to Dad?" he asked hesitantly. Elena's fork froze midair. She carefully placed it down and met his eyes. "We've talked, yes. And," Alex pressed, "are you going to let him come back?" Lily, who had been quietly picking at her food, suddenly spoke up. "I don't want him to. He hurt you." Elena's chest tightened. She wanted to protect them from the full weight of what had happened, but she couldn't shield them from the truth forever. "What your father and I are going through is complicated," she said gently. "But no matter what happens, we both love you very much. That will never change." It wasn't the answer they wanted, but it was all she could give. As she cleared the plates after dinner, she realized something. Her children were watching her, taking cues from her strength or lack thereof. If she crumbled, so would they. One Saturday afternoon, Elena decided to clear out the attic. It had been years since anyone had ventured up there, and the space had become a dumping ground for forgotten belongings. She figured the physical labor might distract her from the emotional weight she was carrying. As she sifted through boxes of old clothes and holiday decorations, she stumbled upon a dusty shoebox labeled Memories. Curious, she opened it and found a collection of letters, photos, and mementos from the early days of her relationship with Victor. There were love notes he had written her, pressed flowers from their first anniversary, and photos of them looking young, carefree, and deeply in love. Tears welled up in her eyes as she held the artifacts of a love that now felt like a distant dream. She remembered the Victor who had once been her best friend, who had held her hand during the births of their children, who had danced with her in the kitchen to their favorite songs. Where had that man gone? And when had their connection started to unravel? But as she dug deeper, she found something else, a journal she had kept during their first year of marriage. Flipping through its pages, she was struck by the honesty of her younger self. She had written about her hopes, her fears, and her unwavering belief in the strength of their partnership. But she had also written about the cracks, the moments when Victor's ambition seemed to outweigh his affection, the times he had withdrawn when she needed him most. The signs had been there all along, buried beneath layers of love and compromise. Elena closed the journal and set it aside. She wasn't the same woman she had been back then, and Victor wasn't the same man. Maybe the truth was that they had been growing apart for years, and the affair was simply the final blow. A few weeks later, Victor reached out again, asking to meet. He sounded different this time, not defensive or pleading, but quiet and subdued. Against her better judgment, Elena agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe. She told herself it was for closure, though part of her was curious to see if he had changed. When she arrived, Victor was already there, looking more disheveled than she had ever seen him. His normally impeccable suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked up as she approached, offering her a small, hesitant smile. "Thanks for coming," he said as she sat down. Elena nodded, her arms crossed. "What do you want, Victor?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us. About what I've done." And, she prompted, her tone sharper than she intended. "I messed up," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I betrayed you, and I betrayed our family. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. For everything." Elena studied him, searching for sincerity in his eyes. She had waited weeks for this apology, but now that it was here, it felt hollow. Words couldn't undo the damage he had caused. "Why, Victor?" she asked quietly. "Why did you do it?" He looked down at his coffee cup, his fingers tracing the rim. "I don't know," he said finally. I think I was scared. Of getting older. Of losing myself. She made me feel alive. But it was selfish, and it wasn't worth it. I see that now." Elena felt a pang of pity for him, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger. "You had a family, Victor. A wife who loved you. Children who looked up to you. Was that not enough?" He didn't answer, and for a moment, they sat in silence. Finally, Elena stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. I appreciate the apology, she said, her voice steady. But it doesn't change anything. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. She walked out of the cafe without looking back. Elena threw herself into her work, her hobbies, and her children's lives. She started attending yoga classes, something she had always wanted to try but never made time for. She joined a book club, rediscovering her love for literature. Slowly but surely, she began to feel like herself again, not just a wife or a mother, but Elena. Her children noticed the change. You seem happier, Alex said one evening as they washed dishes together. I am, Elena admitted, smiling. It's not easy, but I'm getting there. She still had moments of doubt, times when the pain of Victor's betrayal would resurface. But she reminded herself that healing wasn't linear. It was okay to feel sad, as long as she didn't let it consume her. One day, as she was tidying the house, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Nadia, her closest friend. Let's grab lunch, it read. I have someone I want you to meet. Elena hesitated, then typed back, sure. The restaurant was cozy and bustling, the kind of place where the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air. Nadia greeted Elena with a warm hug, then introduced her to a man named Daniel. He was kind, soft-spoken, and had a gentle humor that immediately put Elena at ease. Over the course of lunch, she found herself laughing more than she had in months. Daniel didn't pry into her past or try to impress her with grand gestures. He was simply present. It was refreshing. As they said their goodbyes, Daniel handed her a business card. If you ever want to grab coffee, let me know, he said with a smile. Elena took the card, her heart fluttering slightly. She wasn't sure if she was ready for anything new, but for the first time in a long time, she felt open to the possibility. That evening, as she sat on her balcony, watching the sunset, she thought about how far she had come. The pain of Victor's betrayal would always be a part of her story, but it didn't define her. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece, and she was stronger for it. Elena smiled, her fingers brushing over the business card in her hand. Her journey wasn't over, but she was ready to see where it would lead.